You have a fever, your body is burning, your head is pounding, and you are lying on a bed of leaves in a world with no pharmacy, no doctor, and no thermometer. The people around you are watching you. One of them walks to a plant, tears off a handful of leaves, chews them, and presses the pulp into a gourd of water. They hand it to you. You drink it. It is bitter. It burns slightly going down, and hours later, the fever breaks. You will never know exactly why it worked. Nobody in the camp knows the word for salicylic acid. Nobody has ever seen a molecule, but somebody, a long time ago, learned that this plant helps, and that somebody taught somebody else, and that chain of teaching has carried the knowledge all the way to this moment, to your fever, to this gourd. How did that person know which plant to choose? Out of the thousands of plants growing in the landscape, why this one? Who discovered that a bitter leaf could bring down a fever, that a certain bark could stop bleeding, that a specific root could calm a stomach? This knowledge did not fall from the sky. It was built, piece by piece, over tens of thousands of years by trial, error, observation, and a kind of intelligence we rarely give our ancestors credit for. The history of medicine did not begin with laboratories or textbooks. It began with a person eating something they should not have eaten, getting sick, and someone else noticing the pattern. It began with animals, and it is still running through your veins today because almost every modern drug is a refined version of something ancient people found in the wild. Let me show you how the first doctors learned their trade. Start with the hardest part of the problem. A landscape has thousands of plants. Some are food, some are medicine, and the differences are not written on the plants. There is no label on a leaf that says fever or deadly. The only way to sort them is to test them, and testing them is dangerous. Every plant in the world has been tested by someone, somewhere, and the results have been passed down ever since. The knowledge that survives is the knowledge that did not kill its discoverer. How do you test the plant safely? Foragers developed careful rules. Taste the smallest amount first. Wait, watch for effects. Smell it, crush it, rub it on the skin before eating it. Never give a large dose of something new to a sick person. These rules sound like modern pharmacology, and they are. They are the same logic that guides a clinical trial. Small doses, observation. The difference is that ancient pharmacologists ran their trials on themselves, with their own lives as the stake. There is one plant in this story that deserves special attention because it connects ancient medicine directly to the modern world. It is called Artemisia annua, sweet wormwood, and it grows as an ordinary weed across Asia. Traditional Chinese healers used it for fevers for centuries, and the recipe was written down in a manual of herbal medicine. In the 1970s, a Chinese scientist named Tuesday Yu was searching for a treatment for malaria, and she went back to those ancient texts. She found a note about extracting the wormwood at low temperature, followed it, and isolated a compound called artemisinin. Artemisinin is now one of the world's most important antimalarial drugs, and in 2015, Tuesday Yu won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the work. The Nobel Committee was, in a very real sense, honoring an ancient herbal recipe. The most important shortcut in this dangerous work was watching animals. This is not speculation. It is documented behaviour. Michael Huffman, a primatologist at Kyoto University, spent years studying chimpanzees in Tanzania, and he found that the chimps practice a kind of self-medication. When a chimpanzee has an intestinal parasite, it will deliberately find a plant called Vernonia amygdalina, strip the leaves, and chew them, even though the leaves are intensely bitter and normally avoided. The plant contains compounds that kill the parasites. The chimp is sick. It seeks out the medicine, it takes the medicine, and it gets better. Huffman calls this behavior zoopharmacognosy, animal medicine knowledge. And it is not limited to chimpanzees, gorillas, bears, elephants, and birds have all been observed eating plants that have no nutritional value but clear medicinal effects. A bear will dig up a root, chew it, and rub it into its fur. A bird will pick specific leaves and line its nest with them. Leaves that repel parasites. Animals know plants, and early humans, who lived next to animals and watched them constantly, almost certainly learned from them. A hunter who saw a sick animal eat a bitter leaf and recover had just received a free lesson in medicine. The body itself also kept the records. When archaeologists find a healed fracture in an ancient skeleton, they are looking at evidence of medicine. A broken leg without treatment is usually a death sentence for a wild animal, and often for a human too. But ancient skeletons from around the world show broken bones that healed cleanly and completely. That means someone set the bone, immobilized it, fed the injured person, and protected them for months while the bone knitted back together. That is medicine. It is not a pill, but it is care, knowledge, and treatment. And it is as old as humanity itself. Neanderthal skeletons show healed fractures and worn-down teeth from using their mouths as a third hand, which suggests that injured individuals were cared for by the group. Some of the earliest evidence of human medicine is not a plant. It is a bone that healed. Once you know a plant is medicinal, the next question is how to use it. This is where the knowledge becomes complex. Some plants work raw. Some need to be boiled into a tea. Some need to be dried and ground. Some work only at specific doses. A medicine in the right amount cures. The same medicine in too large an amount kills. The line between drug and poison is a matter of quantity, and ancient healers understood this. They measured, they standardized, and they passed the recipes down. The first pharmacologists did not have scales and vials. They had gourds, fire, and memory. Now, let me show you how preparation was itself a technology. Boiling a plant in water changes what it does. Some compounds dissolve only in hot water, and some are destroyed by heat. The choice between a fresh leaf, a dried powder, and a boiled tea was a real chemical decision, made without chemistry. Healers also combined plants, and the combinations were tested just as carefully as the individual ingredients. Some plants were added to make the medicine taste better. Some were added to make the body absorb it faster. Some were added because they made the other plant work. The ancient pharmacy was a kitchen, and the healers were chefs who knew exactly what each ingredient did. The archaeological record now shows just how deep this knowledge goes. In 2017, a team led by Weyrich at the University of Adelaide published a study in the journal Nature that shocked the field. They extracted DNA from the dental calculus, the hardened plaque of Neanderthal teeth found in Spain, and they found something unexpected. The Neanderthals had been eating poplar bark. Poplar bark contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, a natural painkiller and fever reducer, and mixed in with it, the researchers found DNA from a mold called Penicillium, the source of the first antibiotic ever discovered. Think about what that means. Tens of thousands of years before aspirin was invented, a Neanderthal was chewing poplar bark for pain. Tens of thousands of years before Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, a Neanderthal was ingesting a natural antibiotic. We cannot know whether they understood what they were doing, whether the poplar was chosen deliberately or eaten by accident, but the coincidence is striking. The molecules that became modern medicine were sitting in the wild, and ancient humans, by some combination of luck and knowledge, found them. There is an even more famous and more controversial piece of this story, and it comes from a cave in Iraqi Kurdistan called Shanidar. In the 1950s and 1960s, archaeologists excavated the skeletons of several Neanderthals there. Around one of them, a man called Shanidar IV, the archaeobotanist Arlette Lerowan found clusters of pollen from flowers, including plants known for medicinal uses. She proposed that the body had been deliberately buried with flowers, an act of ritual and care. The flower burial became one of the most famous images of Neanderthal humanity. Later research has questioned the interpretation. The pollen might have been carried in by burrowing rodents, not placed by Neanderthals. The debate is still alive. But whatever the truth of the flower burial, the discovery itself changed how scientists thought about Neanderthals, and it opened the door to decades of research into their plant use. The question is no longer whether Neanderthals used plants. It is how much they knew. As humans moved into farming, the medicine chest grew. The Neolithic revolution did not just create agriculture, it created the first gardens dedicated to healing. The opium poppy is one of the clearest examples. Archaeologists have found residues of opium on pottery from Neolithic sites in Europe, including La Marmotta in Italy, dating to about 5,700 BC. The people who made those pots were not accidentally growing poppies. They were growing, harvesting, and processing one of the most powerful medicinal plants on Earth, thousands of years before the first written prescription. Opium is a perfect case study in the double-edged nature of ancient medicine. In the right dose, it is the most effective painkiller humanity knew. It stops diarrhea, calms pain, and induces sleep. In the wrong hands, it is a destroyer. The Neolithic healers who worked with opium had to know the dose. They had to know when to use it and when not to. They were practicing medicine with everything that word implies, including the danger. There was another category of plants that ancient peoples handled with even more care, and it sits at the edge of medicine and ritual. The mind-altering plants in societies around the world, from the Siberian tundra to the Amazon rainforest. People discovered plants that change consciousness, and they did not treat them as casual recreation. They treated them as sacred. The shaman or healer was the specialist who knew these plants, the doses and the dangers. Tobacco, coca, ayahuasca, peyote, and dozens of others were used in ceremonies often to treat spiritual or mental illness. Sometimes as part of healing rituals, ancient peoples did not separate the body and the mind the way modern medicine often does. A healer who treated a broken bone and a healer who led a trance ceremony were often the same person, working from the same belief that healing means restoring the whole person. The status of the healer in ancient societies is part of the story too. The person who knew the plants held a special position. They were the ones who could save a dying child, ease a mother's pain, and close a wound. They were respected, sometimes feared, and they guarded their knowledge carefully. The knowledge was often passed from teacher to apprentice, or from elder to chosen family member. In long apprenticeships that could last years, a healer was not born knowing the plants. They were trained. The first medical schools were not buildings. They were relationships, the patient transfer of knowledge from one human mind to another, one generation to the next. Ethnobotanists have recorded how this knowledge is transmitted, and it is always the same shape. A child shows interest. An elder decides the child is ready. The lessons begin. This plant for fevers, this one for wounds, this one to avoid, this one only in tiny amounts. The student watches, practices, makes mistakes, is corrected. Years pass. The student becomes the healer, and one day the elder is gone, and the knowledge has a new home. This system ran for tens of thousands of years. It is the oldest educational institution in the world, and it is still running in some places today. The living record of this knowledge is still with us. Ethnobotanists, scientists who study how people use plants, have spent decades documenting the medicinal knowledge of indigenous peoples around the world. The Kalahari San, the Aboriginal Australians, the peoples of the Amazon, the Highland peoples of New Guinea, each tradition holds detailed knowledge of hundreds of medicinal plants. Which bark stops bleeding, which root calms fever, which leaves reduce swelling, which seed treats a cough. This knowledge was not written down for most of history. It was carried in memory, demonstrated in practice, and taught to the next generation. Some of these traditional medicines have walked directly into the modern pharmacy. Australian Aboriginal peoples used the oil of the tea tree for wounds and skin infections for thousands of years, and today tea tree oil is sold in pharmacies around the world. The leaves of the eucalyptus, used by Aboriginal peoples to treat fevers and congestion, became the basis of eucalyptus oil, still used in cough medicines. These are not obscure curiosities. They are commercial products made from plants that indigenous healers identified, tested, and used long before any scientist studied them. The shelf of a modern pharmacy is, in part, a museum of ancient medicine. There is even a biological reason that some of this knowledge came easily. Human beings are wired to be suspicious of bitter tastes. Babies grimace when they taste something bitter, and that grimace is an ancient protection. Many plant toxins are bitter, so a natural aversion to bitter keeps you from eating poison. But that same aversion means that when an early human forced themselves to swallow a bitter leaf for the sake of a fever, they were overriding a powerful biological warning. The healers who did this had to be confident, and their confidence came from experience. The bitter taste was probably also part of the signal. In many traditions, the most bitter plants are considered the strongest medicines, a folk rule that happens to correlate with the fact that many active medicinal compounds are bitter alkaloids. Wound care added another layer of knowledge. Honey is one of the oldest known wound treatments, and it is also one of the most scientifically validated. Honey is naturally antibacterial, it keeps wounds moist, and it does not sting like many modern antiseptics. Ancient peoples from Africa to Europe to Asia used honey on wounds, and the practice appears in the earliest medical writings. The reason it works was not understood for thousands of years, but the empirical knowledge was solid. You put honey on a cut, and the cut does not get infected. That is a medicine. The user may not know the word antibacterial, but they know the result. It is difficult to overstate how much modern medicine owes to this ancient tradition. The willow bark that ancient peoples chewed for pain became aspirin. The foxglove that folk healers used for heart problems became digitalis, still used today. The cinchona bark that Andean peoples used for fevers became quinine, the first effective treatment for malaria. The curare that Amazonian hunters used to poison their arrows became a muscle relaxant, used in modern surgery. Time and again, modern pharmacology has gone looking in the rainforest, the mountains, and the deserts for the plants that ancient healers already knew. And time and again, the ancient knowledge has led the way. There is a quiet tragedy in this story as well. Much of this knowledge is disappearing as traditional ways of life are abandoned, as elders die, as languages are lost. The medicinal knowledge that took tens of thousands of years to accumulate is being lost with them. Every time an indigenous medicine woman dies, the world loses a library. Ethnobotanists race against time to document what remains, knowing that some of it will be gone before it is recorded. There is also a scientific lesson buried in this history, and it is about how knowledge is built. Modern science loves to present itself as a single method, developed in laboratories, with peer review and controlled experiments. But the ancient medicine makers were doing the same thing with cruder tools. They formed hypotheses. This plant might cure a fever. They tested them. They gave the plant to a sick person and watched. They controlled for error. They used small doses first. They watched for side effects. They tried again. They recorded the results, not on paper, but in memory and ritual. When modern pharmacology validates an ancient remedy, it is not discovering something new. It is confirming a result that a very old experiment already produced. The difference between the ancient healer and the modern scientist is not intelligence or logic. It is the accumulation of tools. The scientist has instruments to measure, databases to search, and laboratories to isolate. The healer had eyes, memory, and a lifetime of practice. Both are trying to answer the same question. What does this plant do to a human body? The healer just had to answer it with far less help. And the fact that so many of their answers were correct is a monument to the human capacity for careful observation. So what does this mean for how we understand our ancestors? It means they were not simple. They were not just hunters and gatherers stumbling through the wilderness. They were scientists. They ran experiments. They observed cause and effect. They built a body of knowledge about the natural world that was so accurate that it still guides modern medicine today. The person who first chewed a bitter leaf to break a fever was doing exactly what a pharmacologist does, testing a hypothesis, observing the result, and remembering the answer. The knowledge was fragile in one sense and strong in another. It was fragile because it lived only in memory. One forgotten generation could lose it forever. It was strong because it worked. The plants cured real diseases, stopped real bleeding, and saved real lives. That is why the knowledge survived for tens of thousands of years, passed from grandmother to child, from healer to apprentice, across continents and ice ages and every disaster history could throw at it. The next time you take a pill, think about where that pill came from. Behind the tablet is a laboratory, and behind the laboratory is a mountain of chemistry. And at the bottom of that mountain, at the very beginning of the chain, is a person in a world without medicine, watching a sick animal eat a bitter leaf. They were not primitive. They were the first doctors, and they are the reason you are still here. Your medicine is older than your species.